I always thought betrayal would hit like a gunshot. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. But when I found out, it felt more like drowning, slow, and suffocating, with the weight of it pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. It started on a Tuesday, an ordinary evening that should have faded into the endless repetition of my life. Mia had kissed me on the cheek before heading out, saying she was going to a late meeting. I barely reacted, just nodded, because after 10 years of marriage, that kind of thing had become routine. But then, by sheer coincidence or cruel fate, I saw her again, barely an hour later, at the gas station near our house. Not in her car, not alone. She was laughing, touching the arm of a man I didn't recognize, and the way she leaned into him told me everything I needed to know. I didn't confront her then. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have been easier to explode in that moment. Demand an answer, let the anger take over, and end it all with a scene that would be impossible to walk back from. But I just stood there, gripping the pump nozzle, filling my tank as if I wasn't watching my wife betray me in real time. She didn't see me. That was the worst part. She was so into whatever moment she was having with him that I may as well have never existed. I went home and sat in the dark for an hour, waiting. When she walked in, she smelled like his cologne, something musky and expensive, something that didn't belong in our home. I asked her how the meeting was. She smiled, kissed me, told me it was productive, then went to shower like nothing had happened. I sat there on the couch, hands gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles turned white, wondering how long she had been lying to me, wondering how many times she had kissed me after kissing him. The next day, I took the day off work and followed her. I wasn't proud of it, but pride wasn't what mattered anymore. She went about her day as if nothing was wrong, which made it worse. Grocery shopping, lunch with a friend, an hour at the gym. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I had misread everything, if I was just being paranoid, if that touch at the gas station had been something innocent. Then, at 3:45 p.m., she drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. I watched her get out of the car, check her phone, smooth her hair. Then, a minute later, he arrived. He didn't park far away, didn't hesitate. He walked up to her with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you belong. She smiled at him like she used to smile at me, like he was the best part of her day, and they walked inside together without a second thought. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought I might tear it off. I wanted to storm in, drag her out, humiliate her the way she was humiliating me. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband who just walked away. I needed proof. I needed a plan. And most of all, I needed her to feel what I was feeling. That's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No, I was going to make her suffer first. I was going to take everything from her before she even realized she had lost. I waited. I wanted to act immediately, but I forced myself to think, to plan, to make sure that when I moved, it would count. That night, Mia came home late, just like she had the night before, just like she probably had for months, slipping into our house like it wasn't the crime scene she had turned it into. She sat next to me on the couch, her body still damp from the shower, her hair pulled back the way she always did when she wanted to seem casual, natural, like she wasn't hiding anything. She talked about her day, complained about the slow day at work, asked me about dinner, all while I sat there pretending I didn't already know the truth. It was easy to fake interest when the rage boiling inside me was enough to keep me awake for days. I asked her about her meeting, the one she had so conveniently scheduled the same time she was sneaking into a hotel room with him. She barely hesitated, barely looked up from her phone when she said it went well, that it ran late because there was a lot to go over. I nodded, let her lie right to my face, let her think she had me fooled, because it was better that way. The next morning, I acted like nothing was wrong. I kissed her before she left, watched her walk out the door like a wife who still loved her husband, and then I got to work. I called in sick, something I had never done in my life, and spent the next few hours setting everything in motion. I needed proof, real proof, the kind that couldn't be explained away with some pathetic excuse. I bought a small voice recorder, something discreet, something that could sit in her car without her noticing. I placed a second one in our bedroom, hidden inside the nightstand where I knew she kept her phone when she slept. I wasn't stupid enough to think she would bring him here, but I wanted to know what she said when I wasn't around. I wanted to know how deep this went, how much of our life had been a lie. By the time she came home that evening, everything was in place. She kissed me hello, just like always, and I had to fight the urge to shove her away. It made me sick to feel her lips on mine, knowing where they had been, knowing that just hours before they had been on him. I had never hated anyone in my life, but I hated her in that moment. I hated her so much I could barely breathe. But I smiled, played the role of the devoted husband, let her sit across from me at dinner and talk about nothing like she wasn't ripping my life apart piece by piece. The next morning, I left for work at the usual time, drove 2 blocks away, then turned around and parked down the street, just out of sight. I waited. At 9:12 a.m., she left, earlier than usual, too early for any excuse to make sense. I followed her, keeping enough distance that she wouldn't notice, and, just like I expected, she didn't go to work. She drove straight to the same hotel, parked in the same spot, walked inside like it was routine. Maybe I was just late to the truth. I stayed in my car, watching, waiting, stomach twisting with the kind of rage that made my hands shake. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. When she finally came out, she looked happy, relaxed. She didn't look like a woman who had just shattered her marriage. She didn't look guilty, and that only made it worse. She got in her car, drove home, and I sat there, gripping the wheel, knowing this wasn't enough. I needed more. That night, I waited until she was asleep before retrieving the recorder from her car. I sat alone in my office, playing the files back, listening to every word, every giggle, every whispered promise she made to him. I wanted to throw it across the room, wanted to smash it, destroy it, erase everything I had heard, but I forced myself to listen, forced myself to hear her say things she hadn't said to me in years. I sat there until morning, until my hands had gone numb, until I had memorized every disgusting thing she had said. The next day, I went further. I found his number in her phone, took screenshots of their messages, copied every pathetic excuse for love she had sent him. I tracked him down, found out where he lived, where he worked, who he was. He wasn't special. He wasn't better than me. He was just some asshole who thought he could take something that belonged to me without consequence. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I wasn't just going to end this. I was going to destroy her. I spent the next 2 days gathering everything I needed. Every message, every call log, every piece of evidence that proved she had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. It wasn't enough to just confront her. Not yet, because that would let her control the narrative, twist the truth, cry, and make excuses like it was all some misunderstanding. I needed something that would leave no room for doubt, something undeniable, something that would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she really was. I made copies of everything, organized it into folders, printed screenshots of their conversations, labeled each one by date and time. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to bury her under the weight of her own lies. That night, I sat across from her at dinner, watching the way she smiled at me, the way she acted like nothing had changed, like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back every chance she got. She talked about her day, about her plans for the weekend, about a coworker who had been annoying her, and I forced myself to nod, to respond, to keep the act going just a little longer. When she reached across the table and touched my hand, I let her. When she leaned in and kissed me after dinner, I kissed her back. I had to. If she had any idea what was coming, she would run. The next morning, I made my move. I left for work at the usual time, but instead of driving to the office, I drove straight to his place. It wasn't hard to find. I had his address, his work schedule, knew exactly what time he left in the morning. When he stepped out of his apartment, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, I was already there, waiting. He didn't recognize me at first, didn't realize who I was until I stepped closer and saw the moment it clicked in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just stood there, mouth half open like he was trying to decide whether to lie or run. You know who I am. My voice was calm, steady, which was more than I could say for him. Listen, man. Shut up. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder, and showed him the screenshots of their messages. The ones where she told him how much she missed him, how good he made her feel, how she wished she could see him more. You don't need to explain. I already know everything. He swallowed hard. eyes flicking between the phone and my face, hands tightening around his coffee like he was about to drop it. "I don't want any trouble," he finally said, voice shaking just enough to make me want to hit him. "You should have thought about that before you started screwing another man's wife. She told me you two were having problems." I laughed because of course she did. That was the script, wasn't it? The one cheaters always used to justify what they were doing. The marriage was already broken. They weren't happy. They were just looking for comfort. It was pathetic, and I almost felt sorry for him because he really thought he was special, really thought she wasn't going to do the same thing to him the second someone better came along. "You don't matter," I said, because it was the truth. "You're just another idiot she's using to make herself feel better. But that doesn't mean you get to walk away without consequences." I handed him an envelope, the one filled with all the proof I had gathered, every conversation, every location timestamp from her phone, every disgusting detail that proved he wasn't just some casual mistake. "You're going to end it," I said. "Right now. You're going to block her, delete her number, and disappear. And if you ever go near her again, if you so much as look in her direction, I will make sure everyone you know sees what's inside this envelope. Your boss, your family, your friends. I have nothing to lose, but you? You have everything." His face paled, hands shaking as he took the envelope, flipping through the pages like he still couldn't believe it was real. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell me I was overreacting, but he wasn't stupid enough to say it out loud. Instead, he nodded, swallowed hard, and said, "Okay." I didn't wait for anything else. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, holding the evidence of his own stupidity, because I had bigger things to deal with. Mia was next. Mia was home when I arrived, sitting on the couch with her laptop, pretending to be busy with something important. She barely glanced up when I walked in, just gave me the same tired smile she always did, the kind that used to make me feel loved, but now just made me sick. I stood there for a moment, watching her, wondering how many times she had looked me in the eye while thinking about him, how many times she had kissed me while still tasting him. The thought made my hands clench, but I kept my voice calm, steady, control, because I'd spent too much time planning this to let emotions get in the way. "We need to talk," I said, and that got her attention. She looked up, blinking like she was surprised by my tone, then closed her laptop and set it aside. "What's wrong?" I sat down across from her, pulled out my phone, and slid it across the coffee table. "Go ahead," I said. "Play the first recording." She frowned, glancing between me and the phone, hesitating like she wasn't sure if this was a joke or a test. Then she reached out, picked it up, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room, laughing, teasing, whispering things to him that I hadn't heard from her in years. I watched her face as it happened, watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her fingers tighten around the phone as realization sank in. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, eyes flicking between me and the screen, breathing faster, blinking rapidly like she was trying to figure out how to react. I let it play for another minute before reaching over and pausing it. "You want to explain?" She swallowed hard, then forced a nervous laugh. "Where did you get this?" "That's your response?" I leaned back, crossing my arms, watching her closely. Not an apology, not an excuse. Just, where did you get this? She licked her lips, set the phone down carefully, and took a deep breath. "Look, I don't know what you think is going on, but don't." I cut her off before she could start spinning whatever pathetic excuse she had prepared. "I know everything, Mia. I know where you go when you say you're at work. I know who you're with. I know how long it's been happening. So don't sit there and insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it sounds like." She stared at me, eyes wide, breathing shaky, fingers twitching like she wanted to reach for the phone again, but knew there was nothing she could say that would erase what I had just made her hear. For a moment, I thought she might break down, that she might cry and beg and try to play the victim. But instead, she exhaled sharply, ran a hand through her hair, and leaned back against the couch with a look that made my blood boil. "So what now?" she asked, voice flat, almost bored. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "That's really your reaction? No guilt, no remorse, just so what now? What do you want me to say, huh?" She spread her arms, voice rising. "You've already made up your mind. You already think I'm some horrible person. So what's the point?" "You are a horrible person," I said, and for the first time, I let the anger seep into my voice. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. and you weren't even smart enough to cover your tracks. She scoffed, rolling her eyes, which only made me angrier. Oh, come on. Don't act like this marriage was perfect. We haven't been happy for years. I stared at her, feeling a cold kind of clarity settle over me. I wasn't happy because I was living a lie, I said. You weren't happy because you were screwing someone else. She didn't respond. She just looked away, jaw tight, hands clenched in her lap like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the right words. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, making sure she heard every single word. I already talked to him. That got her attention. She snapped her head up, eyes narrowing. What? I went to his place this morning, I said. Gave him a little preview of what's coming next. What did you do? Her voice was sharp now, defensive. Relax, I said, smiling just enough to make her nervous. I didn't hit him. Didn't need to. I just showed him exactly what you are. Showed him the messages, the calls, the proof that he's nothing more than another idiot you use to make yourself feel better. She clenched her jaw, shaking her head. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted. And guess what? He's done with you. Blocked your number, deleted everything, cut you off completely. I tilted my head, watching her reaction closely. How does that feel, Mia? How does it feel to be tossed aside like garbage? Her face twisted, lips pressing together, hands gripping the edge of the couch like she wanted to throw something, hit something, do anything but sit there and take it. For the first time, I saw panic in her eyes, real panic. Not because she regretted what she had done, but because she had lost control of the situation. You don't get to do this to me, she snapped. I didn't do anything, I said. You did this to yourself. She stood up so fast the coffee table shook. What do you want, huh? You want me to beg? You want me to cry and tell you it was a mistake? Fine, I'll say it. It was a mistake. I screwed up. Happy? No, I said, standing up too, meeting her glare with one of my own. But I will be when I'm done with you. She flinched, but she covered it quickly, folding her arms and glaring at me like I was the one ruining her life instead of the other way around. You don't get to play the victim, I continued, voice calm but sharp. Not after everything you've done. You want to know what happens next? You're leaving. Tonight. I already packed your stuff. Her mouth fell open slightly before she clamped it shut, her hands clenching at her sides. You can't just kick me out. I can't, I said. And I will. She hesitated, like she wanted to fight, wanted to argue, but for once she had no control, no power, no way to manipulate her way out of this. Go to a hotel, I said. Go cry to your friends. Hell, call him if you want, but he won't answer. You don't get to stay here. You don't get to keep pretending like this is your home. She was breathing hard now, staring at me like she barely recognized the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe for the first time, she was seeing what I was capable of. Get out, I said, and this time, she knew I meant it. Mia didn't move at first, just stood there staring at me like she was waiting for me to take it back. Like if she stayed quiet long enough, I would break, I would cave, I would let her stay and pretend none of this ever happened. But I wasn't that man anymore, and the longer she stood there, the more I could see the reality of the situation sinking in. I had taken everything from her, stripped away the safety net she thought she had, left her with nothing but the weight of her own actions. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, maybe one last excuse, one last pathetic attempt at justification, but then she snapped it shut again, nostrils flaring as she turned on her heel and stormed toward the bedroom. I followed, not because I was going to help her, but because I wanted to make sure she didn't try to pull anything. She threw open the closet, saw the 2 suitcases already packed and waiting for her, and let out a sharp, bitter laugh. She bent down, unzipped one, flipped through the clothes, and then turned to me, eyes burning with frustration. You really packed my stuff, she said, voice thick with disbelief. I told you I did. She shook her head, exhaling harshly. This is insane, you know that. You're acting like I'm some criminal. You're worse than a criminal, I said, stepping closer. At least a thief doesn't pretend. I always thought betrayal would hit like a gunshot. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. But when I found out, it felt more like drowning, slow, and suffocating, with the weight of it pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. It started on a Tuesday, an ordinary evening that should have faded into the endless repetition of my life. Mia had kissed me on the cheek before heading out, saying she was going to a late meeting. I barely reacted, just nodded, because after 10 years of marriage, that kind of thing had become routine. But then, by sheer coincidence or cruel fate, I saw her again, barely an hour later, at the gas station near our house. Not in her car, not alone. She was laughing, touching the arm of a man I didn't recognize, and the way she leaned into him told me everything I needed to know. I didn't confront her then. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have been easier to explode in that moment. Demand an answer, let the anger take over, and end it all with a scene that would be impossible to walk back from. But I just stood there, gripping the pump nozzle, filling my tank as if I wasn't watching my wife betray me in real time. She didn't see me. That was the worst part. She was so into whatever moment she was having with him that I may as well have never existed. I went home and sat in the dark for an hour, waiting. When she walked in, she smelled like his cologne, something musky and expensive, something that didn't belong in our home. I asked her how the meeting was. She smiled, kissed me, told me it was productive, then went to shower like nothing had happened. I sat there on the couch, hands gripping the armrests so hard my knuckles turned white, wondering how long she had been lying to me, wondering how many times she had kissed me after kissing him. The next day, I took the day off work and followed her. I wasn't proud of it, but pride wasn't what mattered anymore. She went about her day as if nothing was wrong, which made it worse. Grocery shopping, lunch with a friend, an hour at the gym. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I had misread everything, if I was just being paranoid, if that touch at the gas station had been something innocent. Then, at 3:45 p.m., she drove to a hotel on the outskirts of town. I watched her get out of the car, check her phone, smooth her hair. Then, a minute later, he arrived. He didn't park far away, didn't hesitate. He walked up to her with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you belong. She smiled at him like she used to smile at